We're going to have a novice camera operator back there running that slideshow. I'm already letting her off the hook now, so. All you got to do is keep up with these slides. She can handle it. Are you ready? Let's test. Let's go to the first slide. Boom. The map. All right. You got it? All right. See? You can do it. Yeah. Good evening. We made our trip back from Arkansas this afternoon. Got back just in time to pretty much get ready and go to Perrytown. Little bit tired, but this is a very interesting chapter. We're going to be in 1 Samuel chapter 28 this evening. If you've read ahead, you probably know exactly what I mean by interesting. There's a particular event in this chapter that kind of jumps out at you as opposed to some of the others. Now, chapter 27, David has went and moved in with the Philistines, right? He's went to Gath, the king of Kish, and has become a mercenary for him. David has been attacking cities that are anti-Israel. He's been annihilating men, women, and child, leaving no witnesses, and taking the spoils of war back. Some of them to Achish, some he'll be keeping for himself. And so he's at least demonstrated himself loyal to King Achish of the Philistines, so that Achish believes that he's got, a loyal subject, soldier, general in David, because he believes that David has been raiding cities in Israel. David told him as such. So he believes that David is very much anti-Israel. He knows that Saul has been pursuing David, so for him it would make sense, right? It fits. The story fits, except that's not exactly what David's doing. And so we pick up here in chapter 28. Well, let me go back to the map. Since we're at the map, there it is. We're looking at the cities here of Gath. This is the city David fled to from Ziph after he and Saul parted ways again. King Achish gave David the village of Ziklag, which even in the text of chapter 27 states that it belongs to the kings of Judah even to this day. So David moved down here to Ziklag, and this is sort of home base for some of the raids he's made back to the Sinai Peninsula, back to the south of Israel. It's made for a pretty good home base for David to work from. Okay, now into the text of chapter 28. In those days, the Philistines gathered their forces for war to fight against Israel. And Achish said to David, "Understand that you and your men are to go out with me in the army." And David said to Achish, "Very well, you shall know what your servant can do." And Achish said to David, "Very well, I will make you my bodyguard for life." Interesting little dialogue between the two. Not sure how one relates to the other. But David presumably has been showing himself loyal to the Philistines, and to in particular the king of Kish here. And we have this war that's about to happen. It's not going to be a skirmish. This isn't a raiding party. We've got a full-scale war that's about to take place. And Achish says, you're going with me. You and your men are going to go with me. Now, he fully believes that David is on his side, right? That he's going to go to war with Israel. David will be there fighting along with him, right? David's response I find interesting. David said to Achish, "Very well, you shall know what your servant can do." It wasn't, "Yeah, let's go take Israel. Yeah, we'll show them," or anything. No, it's more of a veiled understanding, isn't it? You shall know what your servant can do, which we understand that David would never turn against Israel, against God's people. He felt horrible about cutting a patch off the king's robe. He's certainly not fixing to go to war against God's people. Yeah, you'll see what your servant can do. Yeah, David's sitting there thinking, "Yeah, we'll take you," kind of a thing. All right, so we have this relationship between Achish and David growing pretty strong. Achish views David as a loyal subject, general, fighter, right? Now we're going to turn our attention to Saul. This war that is at hand, and I'm showing the map now because we're going to start reading and talking, and I won't want to come back to the map. The battle line is drawn up here at Shunem. We're up in the Jezreel Valley area. Really, we're to the north and the east end of the Jezreel Valley. We got Shunem. You got Mount Gilboa, which is where the armies of Israel are going to be drawn up. And what we need to politically, this is what's happening. You see Philistia written right here. The Philistines control the, it's been a long day. What's the word I'm looking? Coastal plains. This is the major trade route through Israel, north to south. Everything coming out of Sinai Peninsula, Egypt, North Africa, that's heading north and east is coming through Israel. Right now, in this point of history, the Philistines control this. However, Israel controls the Jezreel Valley. If the Philistines gain control of Jezreel Valley, they have the entire trade route. Jezreel Valley is where one of the major trade routes breaks off. One goes north on up to Asia Minor, that's in the ceiling. The other one breaks hard east right here and goes up over to what we know as Babylon and that direction. Modern day Iraq goes way over into Mesopotamia. And so who controls the trade routes, controls the money, has the power. And so along these battles, in fact, that route right there, Egypt, they're weak right now. This particular period of time, they're down here struggling themselves. The Philistines gain control. Assyria is to the north. They haven't really developed into a world power just yet, so there's sort of a power vacuum. So a smaller people group such as the Philistines can gain control of it. And so that's what we're seeing happening. They're trying to expand their political power, their clout, by gaining control of that whole travel corridor. Okay, so politically, that's what's taking place. That's why the reason. That's the reason for the war. Okay, now let's get to Saul. Now Samuel had died, and all Israel had mourned for him and buried him at Ramah, his own city. Saul had put the mediums and the necromancers out of the land. The Philistines assembled and came and encamped at Shunem. And Saul gathered all Israel, and they encamped at Gilboa. And when Saul saw the army of the Philistines, he was afraid, and his heart trembled greatly. Saul inquired of the Lord, and the Lord did not answer him, either by dreams or by Urim or by prophets. Saul said to his servants, "Seek out for me a woman who is a medium, that I may go to her and inquire of her." And his servant said to him, "Behold, there is a medium at Endor." Pretty good, each chapter, and we ought to do this at some point. It'd be an interesting study, but you've heard me say a few times now, we work through the text, you see theologically what is God doing in the text and what are people doing in the text. Well, what God is doing in the text here is turning away from Saul, right? Saul is no longer getting information. There's no more battle plans given to Saul, either through dreams or through the high priest wearing the ephod with the Urim and Thummim in it, where they would consult God to get answers to their questions. There's no battle strategies given. He's nothing. He is in the dark. God is not communicating to Saul at this point. However, David has a priest with him. He has an ephod. He has a Urim and Thummim. And God is continually guiding and directing David. We see this transition taking place, right? We see how this is working between David and Saul. God has torn himself away from Saul. So Saul is doing the thing that well, the only thing that he really knows to do, and that is to break the law. He's already expelled the mediums and necromancers and such from the land, but now since God's not going to help him out, he's trying to find some other way. He's seen the army of the Philistines. He's scared. So he wants to go find this medium that he can go and inquire of her, right? He's got some servants there that know of one, the medium at Endor. Now, we always grew up, I think it's King James, older King James, is the witch of Endor, witch at, that's how we would always call her, the witch at Endor, witch of Endor. So Saul disguised himself and put on other garments and went, he and 2 men with him. They came to the woman by night. He said, "Divine for me by a spirit, and bring up for me whomever I shall name to you." The woman said to him, "Surely you know what Saul has done, how he has cut off the mediums and necromancers from the land. Why then are you laying a trap for my life to bring about my death?" But Saul swore to her by the Lord, "As the Lord lives, no punishment shall come upon you for this thing." Then the woman said, "Whom shall I bring up for you?" And he said, "Bring up Samuel for me." Now, interesting, right? 1, the scenario with the witch of Endor. 2, that Saul is desiring for her to bring up the spirit of Samuel, right? Last we saw these two, they didn't part on great terms, really. They kind of quit speaking there towards the end after Saul had disobeyed God. Samuel kind of laid it out there for him, and they went their separate ways. So it's not the greatest of circumstances, but Saul is a desperate man. He's a desperate king. When the woman saw Samuel, she cried out with a loud voice. The woman said to Saul, "Why have you deceived me? You are Saul." The king said to her, "Do not be afraid. What do you see?" And the woman said to Saul, "I see a god coming up out of the earth." I'll slow down enough to point out, notice the little g. This is just a general designation. She's not calling Samuel Yahweh or even El, capital E, God. It's more casual than that. He said to her, "What is his appearance?" And she said, "An old man is coming up, and he is wrapped in a robe." And Saul knew that it was Samuel. And he bowed with his face to the ground and paid homage. And Samuel said to Saul, "Why have you disturbed me by bringing me up?" And Saul answered, "I am in great distress, for the Philistines are warring against me, and God has turned away from me and answers me no more, either by prophets or by dreams. Therefore I've summoned you to tell me what I shall do." Saul is a desperate man. Desperate times call for desperate measures, right? Raise the spirit of Samuel by the witch of Endor so that you can advise me, right? That's the scenario playing out for us. Samuel said, "Why then do you ask me, since the Lord has turned from you and become your enemy? The Lord has done to you as he spoke by me, for the Lord has torn the kingdom out of your hand and given it to your neighbor David." Samuel is just pointing out the obvious, right? You see, you said yourself, God is not answering you. He's turned from you. He's turning to David. Kingdom is torn out of your hand and given to your neighbor David. It's all matter of fact, but sometimes certain situations in our life is hard, and we tend to overthink and we overreact, and sometimes just simple words of wisdom pointing out the very obvious is what we need to hear, and that's what Saul is receiving. It's not what he wants to hear, but it's just a simple truth that was staring him in the face that he either was refusing to acknowledge or was hoping for something different. Samuel continues, verse 18, because you did not obey the voice of the Lord and did not carry out his fierce wrath against Amalek. Therefore the Lord has done this thing to you this day. Moreover, the Lord will give Israel also with you into the hand of the Philistines. Tomorrow you and your sons shall be with me. The Lord will give the army of Israel also into the hand of the Philistines. Well, that's more good news, right? Saul is pretty much getting everything that he didn't want to hear all at once, right? Yes, God's turned away from you. Yes, you know that he's tearing the kingdom away from you and giving it to David. Yes, you're going to lose this battle. You and your sons are going to die in it, and the army of Israel with you. There's no bright spot to be seen in that for Saul, is there? I mean, he's not going to walk away from this moment and go, well, there's something I can hang my hat on. No, not really. This is all bad stuff happening here. Then Saul fell at once, full length on the ground, filled with fear because of the words of Samuel. There was no strength in him, for he had eaten nothing all day and all night. And the woman came to Saul, and when she saw that he was terrified, she said to him, behold, your servant has obeyed you. I've taken my life in my hand and have listened to what you have said to me. Now, therefore, you also obey your servant. Let me set a morsel of bread before you and eat, that you may have strength when you go on your way. He refused and said, I will not eat. But his servants, together with the woman, urged him. And he listened to their words, and so he arose from the earth and sat on the bed. Now the woman had fatted a calf in the house, and she killed it quickly. Yeah, I said that backwards. She quickly killed it. And she took flour and kneaded it and baked unleavened bread of it. And she put it before Saul and his servants, and they ate. And then they rose and went away that night. All right, so Saul got bad news. Horrible news. He just falls to the earth, right? I've been around bad news. I've had bad news, given bad news, been with folks when they receive bad news. And sometimes that is the appropriate reaction, just to fall to the earth under the weight of it, right? That's what Saul has done. He's got no hope. He's got no strength. So the hospitable thing, right? Let's try to get some food in him. Let's prepare him for the travel that's ahead. This is, just some pleasantries here at the end, right? All right. Who wants to tell us the elephant in the room in this chapter? What is it? What is the elephant in the room? What is the thing that's happening in this chapter that is sets itself apart from everything else? Is all this just normal Bible history stuff, or is there something in here that's a little bit outside of what we would call the ordinary? That is it, isn't? I mean, now there's a lot of words to be said, but the first thing I want to do is go to Deuteronomy. Just a couple reasons. We'll read the passage and we'll point those out. This is from chapter 18. This is the law. We're reading from the law given to Moses, right? This is Levitical law. When you come into the land that the Lord your God is giving you, you shall not learn to follow the abominable practices of those nations. There shall not be found among you anyone who burns his son or daughter as an offering. That did happen later, a little bit later in Israel's history. Anyone who practices divination or tells fortunes or interprets omens or a sorcerer or a charmer or a medium or a necromancer or one who inquires of the dead. For whoever does these things is an abomination to the Lord. And because of these abominations, the Lord your God is driving them out before you. You shall be blameless before the Lord your God. For these nations which you are about to dispossess, listen to fortune tellers and to diviners. But as for you, the Lord your God has not allowed you to do this. All right, so there's a couple things that we need to make sure that we understand here. One, Israel is going in here to dispossess the promised land, Canaan. Canaan is filled with polytheistic idol worshipers, right? And that's number one. Number two is the fact that these people that are listed and practices that are listed exist. And it is because they exist and that these Canaanites are practicing them is why they are being driven out of the land. And by driven out, in most cases, when it was done correctly, they were annihilated. They were defeated. If you remember back when God is making the covenant with Abraham, he talks about this time where Abraham's descendants will be sojourners in a foreign country, in Egypt. And they'll come out with great possessions. They're going to have to dwell there for 400 years because the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete. Right? God is being patient with the people, but they are going to continue in these kind of abominable practices, which is the cause or the reasoning for them being driven out and God's people being brought in. All right? God's people, because of the law and because of God himself, they're going to be a sanctified people. They are going to be unique among the other peoples. The New Testament would say Gentiles, here Canaanites. God is going to dwell among his people. That's a little different than other gods. He is going to be the only God. First and second commandments, right? You shall no other gods before me, no graven images, so no idol worship, anything. Monotheistic worship, God and God alone. All right, so God is doing away with polytheistic worship and all of the tenets, all the things that go along with polytheistic worship and Canaanite worship. All of these practices are going to be done away with because, at least one of the reasons is, all of these practices were ways to get around consulting God. And that's exactly why Saul is doing it. God's not answering, God's not directing, God's not helping. He's got to find a workaround. He's got to find another way to get the answers he desires, so he finds another way to go about it. The witch of Endor. I was talking a few minutes ago, and I can't remember where it is down I-20. There's a big old billboard, Madam So-and-so. You pull in off the interstate there, and you get your fortune read and all that kind of thing. Anyway, kind of thing still, goes on or practices, whether real, fake, imagined, whatever the case may be. All isn't still, even today, for folks who participate in that kind of thing, is still a workaround from God, right? Okay, so we'll go back to 1 Samuel. We know that the practice of consulting a medium, a necromancer, she could fall under medium, necromancer, one who talks to the dead. She kind of falls in that category. Saul at some point expelled them from Israel, and by expelled, that means evidently she's either hiding out. Endor is somewhere just south of the Sea of Galilee, and that's just a guesstimate. We don't know exactly where Endor was. So we have some historical understanding. For people groups who live in this area in and around the same time, we have some Hittite records, we have Mesopotamian records of necromancers, mediums consulting the dead, right? And some of them, in some cases, there's step-by-step instructions on how they accomplished this thing. Interesting enough, the Hittite records are almost identical to what we see taking place here. Now, Hittite records, you would find this person, this medium. A pit was dug. Now, it didn't say whether we're talking about somebody digging a well or whether they just dug a bowl-shaped hole in the ground. They would usually offer libations. They would pour wine in it, and they would seek to call up the spirit of someone in the near proximity of the person that came to consult the medium. So it'd be like an immediate family member kind of situation is sort of how it's explained. I think even in King James, she is, when she's not called the witch of Endor, she's called the familiar. That's part of the reason, is they would call up a person familiar to the person who has shown up. In the Hittite records, the spirit would be called up and would speak directly to the person who came to visit the medium. Other Mesopotamian records, the medium was more of a go-between, a translator between the two. And that's why I said the Hittite records are really similar to what we read here in 1 Samuel 28. All right, so we got this weird situation here. We have Saul doing that thing which is against the law, as we read here in Deuteronomy 18. We have the witch of Endor, the medium of Endor, whichever you prefer, still existing. And then we have a conversation between Samuel and Saul. Now, this could be the harder part of it. If we just had Saul going to a necromancer or witch, and we have this account that it happened, or she is speaking on behalf of Samuel, that kind of thing, we could kind of explain that off and pass it off. But we actually have to wrestle with this, right? We have to wrestle with it because there's a conversation between the two, which brings us to a point that we have to acknowledge to some extent something very spiritual, something very distant to our way of thinking is taking place right here, because we don't do this, do we? It's not normal for and y'all spoke into anyone dead lately? I mean, I've not. I haven't. So this is a hard thing to wrap our minds around, right? It's pretty easy for us to, we live in a very modern, I'd say modern, I guess we'd be postmodern now, society. We don't think about the spiritual world all that much. Even studying through Romans, and we get into chapter 8, and we talk about having the Holy Spirit of God dwelling within us. That's pretty tough for us to even begin to fathom in and of that. What does that look like, and what does that mean? And then we get to a place like this, and we're confronted with something that we usually associate with a B scary movie, from the mid-1980s. This is something that's way out there for us, right? And so we acknowledge the fact that we live in a very physical world, right? While at the same time living in a spiritual world. And we struggle to understand how those two work with one another. There's a passage in 2 Kings, and you may be familiar with the story. It's Elisha, and he's got a helper with him, a young man. His name is Gehazi. Assyria has been breathing on the neck of the northern kingdom of Israel for a while. They've been making raids. And Elisha, being the great prophet that he was, would inform the king of Israel about these impending attacks. And so you'd have armies of Israel guarding whatever village that king of Assyria was going to attack. And he kept being thwarted time and time and time again. And you get the verbiage from him is as if someone is in my chambers with me when I sleep. They hear my plans and the thoughts of my heart and are revealing them to the king of Israel. And his advisors say it's Elisha. It's the prophet of God. And I can't recall the name of the city. I could probably look it up pretty quick. The name of the city that Elisha and Gehazi are inhabiting at the moment, somewhere around in the Jezreel Valley. I can't remember which one. Might have been even Samaria because he was around there a lot. Gehazi gets up one day and he's looking out the window and the Assyrian army has showed up. Right? And it's huge. They got a king of Assyria. He wants to deal with Elisha. He has got to get him out of the picture just so he can continue his plans with Israel. He's got to take them over. And Gehazi is like any young fellow would. He's freaking out. Right? This is it. This is the day we die. He's looking out the window, and these thousands of soldiers are out there. And Elisha just very calmly says, oh, if only you could see. Right? And then Elisha says his prayer for Gehazi to have what I would call eyes of faith. And Gehazi looks out the window and the mountains are full of God's army surrounding the city. And now the Assyrian army don't look like very much down there. You have the armies of God gathered around them. And so we see the spiritual realm and the physical realm inhabiting the same place, and we struggle to see. We struggle to see the spiritual. We try to reason and make explanation for how this can be, and then we have a passage like 1 Samuel chapter 28 where the spiritual and the physical collide, and dead Samuel is speaking to a living Saul, and this is not Jesus casting out demons and having a conversation with them or anything like this. This is completely out and off to the side. This is an illegal activity. It is forbidden by law, and yet here it is happening. Maybe if we had eyes of faith, we could see a little bit more of the spiritual taking place today. I don't know. And so, what are your struggles with that? How do you process the spiritual and the physical as we see this taking place here in 1 Samuel? I want to open the floor up and let you. That's why we were late. We had so much conversation that I couldn't get them to be quiet long enough for me to say a closing prayer and get over here. He allowed it, right?
Go back and read that verse when all this takes place.
Back to
When the witch calls up
Samuel. Let's see. That is. Whom shall I bring up? Here in verse 11.
Yeah.
Whom shall I bring up for you? He said.
Verse 12.
Okay. Keeping up?
When the woman saw Samuel, she cried out with a loud voice.
Yeah.
Hey, she finally worked and got somebody to come by. It scared her to death. She wasn't used to this. She was
I don't
like any of them. It was fake.
I don't know. I don't know that I agree with that, Hunter, because her first statement after she cries out is, "Why have you deceived me? You are Saul." She come to realize instantly that this meant her death. Because, oh no, this wasn't Samuel, his first cousin that lived in the house down the street. This is Samuel, the prophet of God, and this is Saul, the king of Israel, who's put all the necromancers out of Israel. Her first statement isn't, oh, it finally worked. It was, you deceived me. You're Saul. She was fearful for her life, right? So I don't know that I would agree with that. Oh, it never worked in the past and it did this time. I'm not sure that that's what she's getting at there.
Like she was worried about her own.
She's worried about execution. Yeah. Right. Like I said, it said Samuel. Okay, I'll call up Samuel. Remember, she's a familiar. She's calling up people that are close to the person in front of her. Saul was the one wanting Samuel. That's the reason Samuel, the prophet of the Lord, came forward. She saw Samuel, the prophet of the Lord, and it scared her to death, because now when she sees that Samuel, she knows that Samuel is the prophet to King Saul. And so, yeah. And it's probably at Samuel's behest that Saul put out the necromancers and the mediums and such. So, yeah. There's a lot that we could talk about with this, and a lot of it would engage us in studying the Holy Spirit and what Paul means by living in the Spirit and that sort of thing. All that is very engaging, and really what I hope this text would do for us is to create a desire in us to go study. If I've said something enough to make you want to go home and open your Bibles and start looking into it on a more deep level than what we can approach here now, that would be fantastic. That's my goal. So, we are physical people, but we aspire to the spiritual, right? We know that God is a spirit, must be worshipped in spirit and truth. I don't know why we choke so much when we begin to speak about spiritual realm. We know it exists, we just tend to prefer not to acknowledge it. But I would argue if we had the eyes of Elisha, we might live this life with a little bit more peace instead of living it like Gehazi and only seeing the bad taking place. All right, we'll stop right here. We'll pick up chapter 29 next week. We're getting close to wrapping 1 Samuel up. Of course, we're going to have to just jump straight on to the 2 Samuel, but Saul is getting to the end of his reign very rapidly. It's approaching very quickly.